Well, afternoon, isn't it? Actually?
Yeah, not in between.
Is this all work?
Yes. Chair of the vice chair. Actually, we're supposed to develop some final slides. So I would send you email and shall I put the link, like the big QR code? Session should be done, no? It may finish at 1.
I can do my own work. Yeah.
I know, but it's in the.
Okay.
Should I put these outside or just wait? Just keep them with you and try and keep them this time.
So then we can leave. Oh yeah, true. Obviously, other girls. Where are they? I should put it under the loudspeaker. We better. Attention Barbara. It does work, so you will hear it. Oh, sit here, man. Sit here. It's low.
Yes.
Just put on what were you expecting?
Yeah, something exciting.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, that's for
Because they would say that this is the
And then the first time you get
like when you
for them to get
yeah. Oh, that's cool. When they have like a party, you just go.
That's for you.
That's it. They yeah. If one country says
Just keep the back, that's fine.
that's it.
Yeah.
One, exactly one country on the other side. I have to go and get the change structure. Oh, that was rough. This has been all the way from Disco to Ready?
The talk boxes like that. It's not real summary.
Can I get your attention, please? 10 points. Yeah, sure. Everyone remain.
Well, if you get today, we just want to get the chorus. Get in your couple of hands. Oh, I'm Have you seen the shows that they do? As soon as it's announcements, no. He breaks into Toki's on the loudspeaker and says, "This is a public service announcement. Everyone in the Pokies room, please go home. Your families love you. I'll let you in on something. Not just anything." The whole time I'm just going, you read about that? No, smiling.
That was the best one.
No, he does.
Not specific.
It's actually the same with this guy, Dental Third. That's right. Everyone when they're talking.
Try it. Turn into a bread. No. Haven't you learned from our friends?
Good afternoon, colleagues. So please take your seat. We will be starting in a minute. Good afternoon. It's nice to see you all here and choosing us to be in this lunch break instead of having a lunch, and then hopefully we're going to have a nice discussion. I would like to welcome you all to the joint side event of the Nairobi Work Programme, the least developed countries expert group, and partners of the Nairobi Work Programme members of Friends of EBA. First of all, I would like to convey the message of Mr. Carlos Fuller, the SABSA Vice Chair, who couldn't be here with you for the opening session, but he promised to try to make it for the second part of the session. And also he asked me to convey his personal thoughts, so I would like to deliver them now. In the area where Mr. Fuller comes from, the Caribbean, as you all know, they see many connections between healthy ecosystems and the well-being and safety of the people. Mangroves and coral reefs buffer them from storms, provide fisheries and livelihoods, and all the life-supporting services that people need for climate resilience. As we will hear in this side event today, adaptation to climate change can strengthen our communities and also the ecosystems. And we need both in order to build resilience. In his role as chair of the SABSTA, guiding the Secretariat in the implementation of the Nairobi Work Programme, Mr. Fuller is excited to see the Nairobi Work Programme as a knowledge for action network for climate resilience. The network, as you all know, has over 340 leading organizations working at the forefront of adaptation knowledge. Furthermore, not just as a chair of SABSTA, but also as one of the partners in his professional capacity in the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, Mr. Fuller, the NVP as a strategic avenue towards engaging stakeholders and mobilizing them to support developing countries. He thinks that such engagement can build upon NVP activities on the thematic areas, for example, ecosystems, human settlements, water resources, and health. It's also heartening for Mr. Fuller to observe how this knowledge for action network for climate resilience is gradually evolving to supporting developing countries and particularly least developed countries throughout areas of adaptation knowledge. The knowledge for action network is coming forward, exemplified in network for the least in the work with the least developed countries expert group. The NVP organized a joint session with the LEG and the MVP partners on the topic of vulnerable communities and ecosystem during the NAP Expo last year here in Bonn. Mr. Fuller firmly believes that this joint work with the LEG provided a sound basis upon which future actions can be enhanced. What you will see here today in this side event is an example of the LEG and MVP partners at the forefront of ecosystem adaptation, combining forces in tapping knowledge to advance adaptation action. Indeed, in the SABS opening plenary, parties have expressed a strong desire to do just that, enhance the role of the MVP in supporting countries in advancing adaptation action, and particularly in implementation of the Paris Agreement. This side event here provides a unique avenue as a way to bridge expertise of NVP partners and other relevant organizations here in the room with what developing countries need in terms of technical expertise and areas of support formulating and implementing NEPs, and particularly in two issues, which I would like to tell you, of ecosystems and also integrating ecosystem-based adaptation in NEPs and national development plans. Later on today, we were hearing from a representative of LEG on areas of technical support needed for developing countries in the context of NEPs. The dialogue will also help identify areas of opportunities and expertise needed to provide technical support to developing countries in context of NEPs on these two issues mentioned earlier. Based on discussion that you will be contributing to today's side event, hopefully, I would like to encourage MVP partners and relevant expert organizations in the room to offer your support and interest to collaborate in responding to developing countries' needs. As partners, you are all invited to pledge actions under the MVP and provide an update to parties on your collaborative actions during subsequent SBs. Such outcomes will craft a meaningful role for the Nairobi Work Programme to work with the partners in supporting developing countries, and particularly the least developed countries, through areas of adaptation knowledge. With these words from Mr. Fuller, I would like to wish you a really successful event and that you have a really fruitful discussion later on. With this, I would like to invite Ms. Musonda Mumba to facilitate the side event on my behalf. Ms. Mumba is a program officer and ecosystem-based adaptation flagship program coordinator in Climate Change Adaptation Unit, Ecosystem Division of the United Nations Environment Programme. She is based in Nairobi. Now I would like to hand over the word. Please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. We're just waking up. Great. My name is Musonda. I'm a Zambian national originally, so I come from the continent of Africa. And I'm very, very excited to be here. And I'm so excited to even see a full house. And we're looking forward to exciting interactions. I want to just say very quickly, please, if you can put your phone on silent, or you can switch it off if you can, so we're not distracted and we can have a fantastic conversation in this coming hour and a half. I'd like to take this opportunity to just invite the first part of the session, which is the framing session. If I can have the presenters over here, Mr. Ali Raza, please, and Ms. Angela Andrade, and also Mr. Paul DeSanka, who will be speaking on behalf of the leg. And since I come from UN Environment Office, we've actually been advised not to use acronyms. So I shall say the List Developed Expert Group. Focal point, please. Thank you. Actually, Mr. Schaffhauser has made my work a lot easier because you actually did indicate what exactly we're supposed to be doing, and it's pretty self-explanatory in the in our flyer. What is it that we want to get out of this conversation today? So we are trying to see how we are building resilience, thank you very much, of ecosystems, but also how are we going to be integrating, or how are governments and everybody trying to actually integrate ecosystem-based adaptation into national adaptation plans. So without further ado, I would like to take this opportunity to just ask my colleague on my left, Ali, to present. He's now sitting here as a representative of the FEBA, Friends of Ecosystem-Based Adaptation Secretariat, and also it works for the World Conservation Union, IUCN. So Ali, you have approximately 7-8 minutes to just give us an intervention and really tell us what you've been doing, the work that you've been doing as a collective, because you're also not just representing IUCN here, and really give us a kind of framing on how this can be done. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I need to go there for
Please.
the presentation.
Please.
Good afternoon. I'll share with you the synthesis report's major key messages. You know, the report which was undertaken by Nairobi Work Program and FEBA as a group of over 40 organizations who have been working on ecosystem-based organizations and INGOs, UN agencies, and different organizations, they are part of it. IUCN is acting as coordinator, and we worked with the Nairobi Work Program for the production of this report. So this has reflections, and based on 45 submissions which were made to the Nairobi Work Program, and we worked with the Nairobi Work Program Secretariat to synthesize these lessons learned, which were based on SAPSTA decision. So here I'm also sharing together with the key messages some of the learning and reflection, so that we can see what could be the next steps. Because overall, climate change is a very complex issue. It cannot be addressed by just having and addressing ecosystems or health or access or market or financing. They all need to be integrated. So that's why it is such a issue which needs to be tackled little differently. Overall, climate change and healthy ecosystems, they play a critical role for all the economies which are based on natural resource management. So when we talk about how to adapt, we need to invest both in ecosystems and also in adaptation activities. But at the same time, it's critical to understand the difference, the fine difference between conservation and ecosystem-based adaptation. Conservation, the primary target audience and all this in that way is local ecosystems and biodiversity. So it is environment-centric. Whereas ecosystem-based adaptation is human-centric, where the use of biodiversity and ecosystem services for enhancing climate resilience of communities. But both needs to go hand in hand. So that's why it's critical that we need to strengthen both ecosystems and communities' resilience. It cannot be either or. So that is the first main thing which is coming out. If sometimes we are just doing business as usual, trying to conserve or anything under the sun and calling it ecosystem-based adaptation. That needs to be changed. And then whenever you take on some complex challenge like this, there are always trade-offs. In every case, there are issues which need to be tackled. And we need to then make a judgment call because climate change does not require just intervention from one area. So when, especially in developing countries, when we are working over there, the resources are scarce and all this, why policymakers should invest into ecosystems or environment or social development. So trades-off are all there. So when we are doing ecosystem-based adaptation, due diligence is critical. Having evaluated over 70 adaptation projects, long-term consequences, in many cases, the interventions were either ad hoc, just looking into local interventions and local economies or human resilience. And once the project period is over, everything back to normal, which means not adaptation. In many cases, maladaptation is taking place. Because, for example, you are having water resources available to local communities, and then downstream water or local biodiversity and people's need, those were never taken into account. And local communities, donors and others, they were all very happy. Oh, we are having wonderful thing in these 5, because evaluation is done in the project, not what's happening downstream. In many cases where I heard those as success stories, and when I went over there, 5 villages, which were the project villages, they were safeguarded against flood management. After 3 years, 20 other villages, which were not part of the project and never had flooding issues. So many a time, well-intended interventions are resulting into maladaptation. As they always say, way to hell is paved with good intentions. So we need to do due diligence. And most of the organizations, development organizations, INGOs, conservation sector, they don't do due diligence in most of the cases. We think a private sector, we always preaching them to do due diligence. So it is critical that we do in all our interventions. And then ecosystem-based adaptation, because it's overall linked with ecosystems and landscape approach. It has synergies, not only looking into adaptive capacities of ecosystems and communities, but also between mitigation and disaster risk reduction. So that, if you look into other discussions and discourses and policy discourse going on here, they're all talking about how to go about it. So this provides a very good opportunity. If we do ecosystem-based adaptation, synergies are there. So at the same time, it is critical that, because when our members have done studies, only in 23 INDCs, ecosystem-based adaptation has been put explicitly. And around 108 talk about ecosystem-based approaches. But if, revision is due, 2018, the process will start. So it's critical that we integrate this so that then the measures can be taken how to implement Paris Agreement. So in NAP and NAP needs to be integrated with ecosystem-based approaches, same with NDCs and NBSAPs and UNSDR, other processes which will go on, so that we have them integrated well within the system. And end of the day, climate change is a moving target. Cities help them to deal with flooding. After 3-4 years, there will be drought in the same area. How to deal with all these areas, which is such a wonderful. So it requires programmatic and long-term planning. We cannot handle it, with 3 to 4 years of a project. So donors need to reconsider. Otherwise, millions of dollars with good intentions going down the drain. How can you say communities will be, climate resilience in 3 to 4 years of a project? First year is spending, mobilizing resources, human and infrastructure and all that. Second year, third year, you're implementing it. Fourth year, you're wrapping up. And then we have wonderful case studies to present. That's not working. And that's based on real life, going to the projects and looking into those. So donors must, and we all have a force to request them. I know many of donors are over here. they must reconsider 3 to 4 year cycle. It must be long-term and linked with a programmatic approach, and then maybe 10 to 12 years of interventions. And last, we are totally wrong-footed when we think adaptation is an end in itself. No, it's not. It's a means towards sustainable development. We must recognize this. Otherwise, when we develop project proposals and project interventions, we think we have achieved those activities and then we are successful adaptation. First, there is no criteria. I challenge all of you, define successful adaptation. We haven't done it in the last 20 years. So it's critical that we need to link these with SDGs. Paris Agreement implementation must be linked. There are different SDGs, we must link those, and those should be implemented, and then we should see the successful adaptation in the context of poverty reduction. They are always vulnerable. Why Cyclone Matthews kills more than 2,000 in Haiti and 24 in the US? Same intensity. So when we say adaptation, successful adaptation, poverty reduction is a critical element in that. So
Okay.
It's a long way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ali, for that framing presentation. Next, I request Angela Andrade, who is actually the chair of the Commission on Ecosystem Management. Thank you. You have 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, please.
Thanks a lot. In this presentation, I will give just a very brief overview of the ecosystem services and ecosystem-based adaptation concepts and the relevance to build resilience of socio-ecological systems to address climate change impacts. We know that these two concepts have been more developed in the context of other Rio conventions, but currently the Paris Agreement is recognizing the importance of maintaining ecosystem integrity to help people adapt to climate change. So the ecosystem services concept or environmental services began to establish itself in the scientific literature in the 70s. And ecosystem services have been defined as the benefits from ecosystems. And so it's clearly a very human-oriented definition. It's very much related to the principles of the ecosystem approach, especially Principle 5, which indicates that the conservation of ecosystem structure and function is necessary to maintain ecosystem services and should be a priority target of the ecosystem approach. We know that in the year 2005, the presentation of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment highlighted the status of the ecosystems all over the world, and also highlighted the ecosystem services framework in the highest level of national level, promoting actions like conservation, restoration, sustainable management of ecosystems, while considering the increasing demand on ecosystem services. So as it has been said, healthy ecosystems provide basic fresh water, food, raw materials, and also contributes in regulating ecological processes which are essential for human well-being. So the ecosystem services concept alludes to a positive relationship between the ecosystem quality and human well-being. And unfortunately, most of these relationships have been poorly understood. There are two main pillars, and just as an example of how to understand ecosystem services in regard to climate change adaptation. We have on one side the ecosystem component and on the other side the human component. Regarding the ecosystem component, we know that the ecosystems and landscapes are living systems, and well-functioning ecosystems play a vital role in maintaining and increasing resilience and reducing climate risks. but the ecosystems themselves, they are also being impacted by climate change, affecting their capacity to continue providing ecosystem services for the human population. And there are many actions that can contribute in building resilience. For example, enhancing carbon sequestration, restoring degraded ecosystems, promoting sustainable management, or even promoting the implementation of agroecosystems or the control of invasive species. On the human side, we know that people have their own values, they have attitudes, they have perceptions. We have also consumption patterns, social structures that are permanently demanding different type of ecosystem services of the natural and transformed. So building resilience to climate change requires an integrated assessment of the complexity of socio-ecological systems, and this is not an easy task. It requires that we also change the way in which we have been dealing with problems. We have to go beyond the traditional cause-effect analysis to more integrated approaches and also consider the relevance of ecosystem governance. So in the year 2009, the ecosystem-based adaptation approach was raised under the CBD, and the definition that was adopted is the use of biodiversity and ecosystem services to help people adapt to the adverse effects of climate change. So EBA, it's essential for climate change resilience, for maintaining ecosystem productivity and guaranteeing food security. Since then, a lot of activities have been developed. We have developed some principles for ecosystem-based adaptation many years ago, and at the moment there are a lot of new developments trying to promote specific guidelines and standards for its implementation. What is important, and I would say that at the very end, is that EBA also empowers local people as drivers of their. This is the main objective of adaptation in general. And just to finalize some take-home messages, to highlight again that healthy ecosystems play an essential role in increasing the resilience of climate change, that EBA is often the best solution to climate change impacts as it provides co-benefits. It can also create jobs and avoids maladaptation. EBA can be applied in a variety of landscapes and seascapes and across spatial scales, from natural areas to human and modified ecosystems, including nowadays the role of EBA in agricultural areas and cities. EBA can and should be combined in many contexts with other solutions, such as green-gray infrastructure, and requires soft measures that are related to communication, governance, education, and capacity building. In this regard, we see that EBA plays a key role in making the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Next, we'll have a just short intervention on behalf of the LIST expert group, LIST Developed Countries expert group, from Mr. Desanka. Please, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I take guidance on the short intervention, so I'll be pretty brief. First of all, apologies from the lecturer and the vice chair that were unable to come to the sessions due to last-minute arrangements in their countries. And the other LEG members that are here at the sessions are pretty busy running around addressing various demands. So I've been asked to fill in. I'll be fairly brief. The LEG works very nicely with the NWP partners in supporting the LDCs as well as other developing countries in addressing adaptation. So this is a very welcome collaboration to look at how to address the issues to do with ecosystems as well as how to apply ecosystem-based adaptation in their national adaptation work. So we are here to take notes and learn from you as experts to guide us. How do we best advise countries on what to do tomorrow in order to address adaptation? It's a simple, straightforward question. That's what we would like to hear from you is, what is the message to the countries? How do they best address adaptation in the area of ecosystems? So please be direct. We know about all the complications and linkages to NDCs, to whatever, and trade-offs, synergies, all those buzzwords we're aware of, but what should countries be doing as a best practice to address issues of adaptation in the area of ecosystems? The Leg has been working with a number of partners to see and explore how to address the SDGs through national adaptation plans, through the NAPs. And there was a side event last week on Tuesday that's on YouTube that you can follow. But they're working with partners to see how do we best advise countries to meet both the SDGs as well as the objectives under the Paris Agreement, as well as the objectives of the NAP process itself, which is basically to reduce vulnerability and integrate adaptation into development planning processes. Second, one of the work elements of the Leg is to see how to advise the developing countries on how to best address the needs of vulnerable peoples, places, and ecosystems. In other parts of the decisions, there's reference to vulnerable groups, communities, and ecosystems. But essentially, it's about vulnerable peoples, vulnerable places, and vulnerable ecosystems. What is the guidance as to how to best prioritize resources and attention to meet these needs of priority ecosystems? Thirdly, one of the things that the SBI is constantly doing is to assess progress in addressing adaptation. And there is an activity starting off in later this year and next year to assess progress in meeting the objectives of the NAPs. So how are countries reducing vulnerability? How are they integrating adaptation into development planning? So this is one area perhaps that you can also assist us in providing us information and evidence on how to best capture this and reflect in the big scheme of things in order to provide better support to the countries. So this is where I'll stop, but we look forward to hearing about your very specific case studies, your best practices, and any advice that you might pass on that the expert groups can look at and then maybe synthesize and use that to better guide the countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much for that intervention. So without further ado, I will request the next set of presenters. Thank you so much to Ali, to Angela, and also to you, Paul, for your intervention. So as our counterparts, please, Ambassador Jumo, Abi, and Nina, please. So just very quickly, we're now moving on to the showcasing segment of the of this side event. We've heard about, we've heard about wonderful framing presentations that have been given. And I think what Paul just touches on, vulnerable people and vulnerable places. So how do we move? So now we're going to the, not that the first session wasn't exciting, but we're going to see and also get a sense about some very beautiful places we call home. How they've changed and what's happening, and really get some experiences. So this is going to be a fairly interactive session. And if we can have that presentation on. So what you're going to see on the screen, I really just photographs from these places. So we have Ambassador on to my right immediately here, Shumo, who's actually going to talk about his wonderful country, the island of Seychelles, as the first presenter. And then we have my colleague on my extreme right over there, Mr. Paul Mafabi from the government of Uganda, who's going to talk about also one of my really favorite places, which is Mount Elgon, because I've been involved in doing some work there. And also Ninel on my left over here, coming all the way from Mexico to tell us about what is happening in Mexico, and also looking at hydrological systems, basins, etc. And I'm very excited because I happen to be a hydrologist. So we shall start with you, Ambassador. Welcome.
Thank you.
Very exciting.
Always.
Oh, it is indeed. So what have you really been doing in Seychelles? Can you tell us a little bit about that? What actions and what outcomes are in place? What really concrete stuff?
Thank you very much. In Seychelles, the really exciting things we've been doing recently, one is we're doing a marine spatial plan for our entire exclusive economic zone. Our exclusive economic zone is 3,000 times bigger than all our islands put together, 1.3 million square kilometers. And we want to turn 30% of that into marine protected areas, partly for ecosystem-based adaptation to climate change, but it's also about conservation, it's also about sustainable development. And raise the funding, because obviously as a high-income island, we don't have access to concessional funding or to ODA. We are pioneering innovative financing mechanisms. And the two we're using to fund, one, to change 30% of our ocean into MPAs, is a debt swap. A $21 million debt swap with the Paris Club and South Africa, using partners like the Nature Conservancy to buy back the debt. And for the 70% of the ocean that will not be protected, but whose sustainable management is necessary to ensure the success of the marine protected areas, because when you put a marine protected areas in oceans, obviously you have ocean currents, that you can't build a wall or a fence for that matter. We are also now discussing with the World Bank and the GEF the world's first ever blue bonds. We've been looking at what the green bonds you may have heard about and tweaking it to raise some $15 to $20 million, partly for blue grants, which will be managed together with the debt swap trust that we've set up, and partly as a blue investment fund, which will provide soft financing to the sustainable sector, especially fisheries, on condition that they adopt sustainable practices, especially artisanal fishermen, especially people who are now in that area that will be protected, the 30%, which is a huge area, who will have to shift or change their activities. As Ali was saying, it's about the communities, it's about jobs, about livelihoods. And it's taking a long time, especially when you do consultation properly. Since 2014, we have done some 20 stakeholder workshops and meetings, some 50 one-to-one meetings with experts, local experts, community leaders, just to discuss. And don't forget, we've been doing the Marine Spatial Plan. We're now in the 6th year of preparing it. Don't forget that when the plan is ready, it is the ocean around us is not the same ocean that was there 6 years ago. So we're building in a review mechanism. For every 3 years, there'll be a review. And every 5 to 10 years, the whole plan will be adjusted as the ocean changes and reacts either to our success in doing ecosystem-based adaptation or to our failures or our shortcomings. And so I think you've been seeing, oh, these are not mine. Good. No crocodiles in Seychelles. The first humans who came wiped them all out, to our regret. Anyway, but it's really a stakeholder, and it's become, and sometimes it's a problem, sometimes an advantage in terms of governance, in terms of transparency. It's become quite political. Obviously, when you affect different communities who are clashing over the same pieces of ocean, if you don't handle it well, it can get out of hand. And maybe that is the one that's why it's taking so long. It's not the technical part. It is the human part. It is the consultation that if you make a mistake, whatever happens could have repercussions for decades, for a long, long time. But is the debt swap, where we could not afford to take a loan to protect 30% of our oceans. We're not going to get ODA. We can't wait for the climate process to deliver. The Green Climate Fund, for example, is supposed to look at EBA as well. So what we did is we approached our partners, and one thing a lot of small islands have is a lot of debt. as a group, as a category, we are among some of the most indebted countries in the world, especially since many of us, only 30% of the islands are LDCs, low income. The rest are all lower middle to upper middle income, to high income countries. So we went to our partners, and this is interesting compared to what's happening in the climate process and other processes. We got Paris Club countries to come together with a member of BRICS, South Africa, to help a high-income SIDS protect its oceans. The result is the first debt swap in the history of the Paris Club for oceans, the first debt swap in the history of the Paris Club with an island country, the first debt swap with third-party buyback. What we did to find the money, because we didn't want to borrow, is with our partner, the Nature Conservancy. All of this happened under the umbrella of the Global Island Partnership, GLISPA. We went to philanthropic communities in the US, Wade Foundation, Oceans 5 to help buy back the debt. Leonardo DiCaprio gave us $1 million for the debt swap if we could match it. And we have set up a trust called SECAT, Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust. It is deliberately named like that to catch the attention of both the climate donor community and the sustainable development conservation. And it is working. And one of the key things to our success is that this trust, which will oversee conservation of 30% of our EEZ, the government has a minority seat on it. The majority is to the stakeholders, the people in the communities, and especially the people who are donors who are giving the money, so they can be sure that the money will not be diverted. The Ministry of Finance is on it, the Ministry of Environment, but most of the people. So in a sense, we took the bold decision to give up partial sovereignty on 30% of our ocean. And it will give grants to different people in the community. Then when we started talking to the World Bank and the Global Environment Facility about blue bonds, we said, okay, that's 30%. What about the 70% that surrounds that 30%? If it is not sustainably managed, it will affect the validity, the legitimacy of the MPA. And the World Bank said, why should we create yet another trust, another foundation, another fund to manage the money? So they agreed that out of the $15 to $20 million that we're going to raise through blue funds, part of it will be given to the trust under the debt swap to be given out as blue grants. And the rest of the money they're still discussing will be given to the Development Bank of Seychelles, which is partly state-owned with private and other countries owning part of the bank, to give out development loans to people in the sustainable fisheries area. So the idea is that the blue bonds will partially be paid back by the fishing community. It is not a subsidy, it is not a handout. These are the exciting new things. Now, you may say, well, you're a high-income country and you can do these things.
I will have to cut you short pretty soon.
Actually, it can be. We are working on replicating it and upscaling it with other countries. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Just incredible what is happening. I mean, we listen to a lot of conversations and dialogues in terms of what's happening in the world, especially to small islands. I mean, for me, what's hit me is the issue of just having to have a debt swap with another country and also with all different organizations, blue bonds, etc. Very exciting and really interesting. But even more, and I think people in the audience need to start thinking about some of the questions you want to pose. 6th year of planning. Of course, ecosystems are changing all the time. 6th year, that is really phenomenal. We now move to the giants of the planet, mountains. Mr. Mafabi, over to you. So I want to know from you, what action have you actually undertaken in Mount Elgon? How has the Ugandan government tried to actually mainstream, integrate, include within its planning process, particularly in the NAP process, and also the issue of scaling up? Are you doing a lot more around the mountain, Rwenzori, other mountain parts of your country, etc.? So if you can just within 5-10 minutes answer that for us.
Thank you very much, Musonda. And yes, to the giants, the mountains. And the mountain in question, of course, is Mount Elgon in Uganda. Just a quick background that this is a water tower for the region, supporting, of course, the water resources in both within Uganda up to the Nile and Egypt. High population density, we're talking of over 900 people per square kilometer. So you can just imagine that's a very highly populated area. And because of this and the vulnerabilities that come with it, this system has actually come under a lot of threat. And of course, because of time, I'll not be able to give you so many threats, but one of them is that it's threatening the existence of the people, because we have regular landslides, we have floods, and you can't believe it that it's a very fertile area, but we even go to the extent of famine. So if you can have a fertile area having famine, that means something is not working. And so the ecosystem-based adaptation project, which was a project implemented in the 3 countries, Uganda, Nepal, and Peru, had, of course, a number of interventions. But what I would like to look at is what are the key outcomes of these interventions at various levels. First, at the policy level, the project helped to implement district-level action planning, integrating EBA interventions into the district development plans. So we did not just stop at implementing the project in the field, but we were able to get the participating districts to mainstream and integrate EBA interventions into their district development plans. But also at national level, it helped to influence integration of EBA interventions into our national climate change policy, into our NDC, and of course now as we prepare our NAP for Uganda, this is going to be very key in integrating into the NAP process. At the community level, the project helps to enhance community financial capital. We had over 2,850 households directly accessing community revolving funds to a tune of over $150,000 within 3 microcatchments. So again, you can see that it focused on helping the communities to look at one of the biggest constraints to development at the community level, which is capital. But also, over 850 landowners were assisted to plant, again, over 200,000 trees for general landscape restoration, among others. But we also introduced simple and adaptable irrigation technologies. Now, this is very important in this area because they cannot really afford the high-tech technologies, but working through gravity flow schemes and providing simple infrastructure to enable the communities to be able to have access to water was very important as an important outcome at the community level. So what have we learned through this process? One of them is that most ecosystem goods and services are taken for granted. And this came very clear in the communities because when you try to engage them, everything was like, but this is what we have been experiencing all along. So how will we make a difference? And I think we were able to demonstrate that difference. So there's a need for sustained engagement and practical demonstrations for uptake. To succeed with the EBA approach, we need practical demonstrations. It was also a lesson we learned is that incentives are a key entry point for promotion of EBA options. If you look at the gravity flow scheme that provided a regular flow of water, we also had community environment conservation funds established. Again, this provided key incentives for communities to be able to engage. That EBA options provide a range of benefits to communities, but these need to be clearly defined and understood for collective action and ownership, since most of these are long-term. Again, to be able to distinguish between business as usual and what EBA provides, this need to be properly distilled, but also cost-effective analysis is key for all EBA activities to demonstrate the numerous social, financial, and biodiversity benefits. The other lesson is that participatory planning, both at the community, local government, private sector, is key for ownership and sustainability. And finally, that EBA brings on board new technologies and innovations which require practical demonstration in order to be adopted by the communities. Now, in terms of scaling up, we are scaling this up to other ecosystems, mountain ecosystems, but also in the next phase of this program, we'll be also reaching out to Kenya. So we'll be scaling up both in Uganda, but also within the wider Mount Elgon area, including Kenya, which is but also mainstreaming EBAs in our nationally determined contributions and the national adaptation plans, and into our implementation of the national climate change policy. We believe that this is going to be an important step in terms of scaling up. But what is going to perhaps something which will take much longer in terms of effect is going to be the scaling up of the payment for ecosystem service scheme, one of the interventions that was introduced through this program. So in a nutshell, that's where we are, and that's what we've been able to learn. We hope we can learn some more from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that intervention, Mr. Bafabi. I just want to say that to just put it into context, people have to be aware that Mount Elgon, which is actually a shared mountain ecosystem, the waters that flow out of Mount Elgon reach the Nile until they get to the delta. So these are systems that are connecting other systems and ecosystems across the African continent. So the benefits are felt to millions and millions of people. So it's really exciting when we hear about this work. Over to you, Mexico. Do tell us what is happening, how are you doing it, how have you done it, what worked, and also the scaling up. How are you scaling up this work also at the national level? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Musunda. Well, I wanted to tell you a brief story about Water Resource Program in Mexico. This is a joint initiative of the National Water Commission, the National Commission for Natural Protected Areas, and WWF Mexico. This initiative started in 2012 in order to establish an integrated systems of water reserves along the country. And water reserves is basically a water volume that should be reserved for environmental purposes. And it started in selected river basins in the country. As you can see in the map on the top, we started in those river basins in a selected set of 189 river basins where water pressure was low and environmental value is high. So regarding to trade-off, we decided to start it on those places where water reserves is feasible in the short term. And water reserves is not an arbitrary volume. It's actually, the idea was based on the concept of environmental flows, that the definitions of if flows, it's a quantity, a timing, and a quality of water that ecosystems require to guarantee its functioning, its well-functioning. For ecosystems, freshwater species, but also human well-being. And as you can see in the graphic, this is an example of a graph. You can see the mineral runoff, and this is just to show the idea of what a water reserve is. If you allocate all water, all the mineral runoff, all the available water in a river basins for human purposes or activities for several uses, human consumption, industry, agriculture, you do not, you are put human systems in a extreme position if you face an extreme event like droughts or floods. So the idea of water reserves following this environmental flow principle is that you are building a buffer zone regarding water to face those extreme events. And we started this initiative with building in a very participatory exercise a standard, a norm. You can see the document in the bottom. I bring some fact sheets if you want to know more details. But this norm basically offers different methodologies depending on the data you have and the capacities you have to measure or to estimate the e-flows that should be reserved in different contexts. So we use this norm to define water volumes on those selected river basins, and we did it with the support of many institutions, not only government institutions, but also private foundations and development banks. And also this is part of the Ramsar Convention, because many of the river basins delivers water or provides water to Ramsar sites as well as natural protected areas. And so far, the outcomes we have is that an official standard, which is a very milestone, a very important milestone in the process of the water research programs. We have applied this standard to 54 river basins. Those river basins include 17 natural protected areas and 13 Ramsar sites. And these studies we have developed has benefit almost 1 million people of direct beneficiaries. It means people who local communities who live on those areas and that have direct access to water consumption. What else? And about how this program is escalated at national level. Well, it started as a national initiative, but at the moment the water reserves are part of the water national program. It's also in the climate change special program, and also it is related directly with 3 commitments in the Mexican NDC. And what we have done to share this experience in terms of learning and creating capacities within the country, we have conducting a lot of workshops with the National Water Commissions and the Commissions for Protected Areas. And we have relied upon local capacities at Academy with Academy and other local NGOs to put the seed of water reserves in different layers from local communities to national public officers. So we are in the middle of this race against time, because water is allocated every day and we need to be in a hurry for water, for reserve water for the environment, which at the end it waters benefits and promotes sustainable development for the whole country. And the commitment of the federal government is to decree or to promote water reserves decrees in 356 river basins by 2018. That means around half of the territory, of the national territory. And I think I went too far.
Well, you did go too far, because you're actually highlighting the most important liquid on this planet that we all depend on, whether we're small island developing states, mountain regions, and river basin regions. That water is just critical. I mean, without it, we're doomed, basically. Thank you so much, Nino, for that.
You're welcome.
And I'll just summarize very quickly before we move to the question section, because we heard from Ambassador Jumeau in terms of really highlighting the complexity of these beautiful spaces in the form of islands. Unfortunately, I've never been to Seychelles, but I'd love to see Seychelles. And it's a gorgeous and it's a stunning island with its own complexities, but 30% of the ocean, and also the dynamic in terms of, you know, trying to find how private sector. I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio, he gave you $1 million. Well, that's good. We should give a Nairobi work program more than $1 million. But seriously, I'm sure. But I mean, for me, it just really does demonstrate the cocktail of partners, engagement, and the role of government, and also going beyond the borders of your island, engaging with the BRICS, for instance. South Africa comes in, and this swap, this sort of resources, and also making sure that the debt is swapped. And I mean, it's fantastic in terms of an approach, but also what really got to me, and I'm sure even in the crowd, is this element of planning 6 years of going through this process. And we know how these ecosystems change. Mount Elgon, I mean, Mount Elgon is a shared ecosystem, and I was involved in this project. And for me, even as a shared ecosystem, the work was primarily in Uganda, but what also it demonstrates is the Kenyan government has learned so much from this work, and really from Uganda as an East Africa community country. How can these two countries, and not just the two countries, but countries beyond that sub-region, because mountains, river systems, landscape connect regions, providing water resources for thousands and millions of people downstream. And also really demonstrating the resilience, the need for resilience for these vulnerable spaces and vulnerable places. Mexico, we heard from Ninel. I mean, for me, the issue of environmental flows has been so really precious to my heart, because coming from Zambia, I did my doctorate on looking at how environmental flows are so critical. How do we allocate enough water for an environment to be sustainable, and that same environment to provide resilience? So for me, it's really interesting, and I think the issue you raise about the relevance and importance of science, very critical. The study of assessing the flows and making sure that we get the science right. It's really, really important. So we really want to hear from you, from the crowd. There is a box in this room. It's the first time I'm seeing that box, actually. It's called a throw box. So what do we want? We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're working on, what work you've been doing. And also, I want to mention that at the back of the flyer is, just to show you, there is the monkey survey that you can fill in. The Secretariat prefers that you actually fill it in online. However, if you cannot fill it in online, we would suggest that you fill it in with, pen to paper. But it's important that you actually tell us what, actions you can support us with, what's the science that's coming out, governments or organizations that are working on ecosystem-based adaptation and all that. So we do have nearly 30 minutes, I think, to go. So please feel free. And we also want to really know some of the interventions that are relevant to developing regions and developing countries, of course, but more in particular to the least developed countries. So over to you. And in case you have a question that you need to clarify, perhaps from the panel members, also you can do that. But we really want to hear from you and also get a sense in terms of commitments on your part. What can you support? What can you contribute to the Nairobi Work Program? So you need to catch the blue box.
Okay. Oh, I think it's.
Oh my. The challenge of technology, but we learn.
Hi, Ruth Spencer from Antigua. I'm on the government's delegation, but I work with local communities, churches, NGOs. My situation is like Seychelles. We are seen as high income countries, but we have lots of poverty. But, officially we are seen as that. So we too have set up a sustainable financing mechanism. It's called the Marine Ecosystems Protected Area Trust Fund. And it was set up with an endowment coming from KFW, the World Bank, and TNC as well. And this is being promoted in the small islands of the Caribbean. So what we are doing, we also have a component for grant funding. In our legislation, the government has mandated that 15% of every fund coming into it goes into this trust fund that will be able to sustain, projects and works. Right now, what we are doing an ecosystems valuation project. And we are partnering with a consultant out of the Netherlands, Esther Wolfs. And what we are doing, because we have so much threats from development, because when they come and they want to bring in their big hotel projects, they want to be at the coast. Being at the coast means they want to cut our mangroves, and they don't understand that that's our first line of protection. So we are currently going through this ecosystems valuation, and we are trying to show to our policymakers, this is the dollar value of the services and the benefits from the ecosystems. We have started, we have about 6 more months to go, but it's a very process. Our board, like Seychelles, is an NGO majority board, so we have the final say. But it's very, very important, and because adaptation involves so much of the local community groups, they all have a say in how things go, because we live in a country where what you do on the land affects what's in the ocean. So we have to mainstream education, we have to get everybody involved, get the partners involved to show how actions affect one another. So thanks for the sharing, and hope we can work together. Who's next? How about you?
At the front here?
Hi, can I?
Oh, okay. Please, go ahead.
I'm going to speak not on behalf of the organization I work for, but just to support what you just said. I've worked on that project before, and I know who the developers are that are threatening the mangroves and the ecosystems in the Caribbean, specifically Antigua. And right now I know that one of your major NGOs are trying to fight that development. EAG, yes. I'm not speaking on behalf of the organization I work for, but I just wanted to support that. It's very important, and it's very, what's the word? It's very eminent, this development. So if their project is failed, then the development will work and the mangroves will be suffering. So, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The lady in the middle. And if you can just introduce yourself at least. Oh, please go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, I'll hand it over shortly. I just wish to thank the panelists for the wonderful discussion, and also the moderators, and it's good to see you there. I'm not sharing anything on the EBA, although we are doing quite much as well in the country. But I wanted Ali to clarify. There's an interesting point you made when you are drawing distinction between conservation and ecosystem-based adaptation, one being environment-centric and the other human-centric. I'd want you to just elaborate a bit on that.
Hi, I have 2 examples which are kind of contradictory between both. No, I have been working in Malaysia with mangrove.
Can you just introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm Elisa from CEF, from the Centro für Entwicklungsforschung. No, I have been working to sites, but in different periods. But what I could get is that the participation of people is quite interesting. For instance, in Malaysia, where people depend on mangrove, they are very interested in protecting their area. They know the functions. But if we go to Peru, we can find a different scenario, especially in the highlands, where people know their traditions, know what is important, but because of the development that is going on, like mining, exploitation, everything changed, you know? And also people don't know about their own institutions that should be taking care of them, you know? Institutions that should be related to the environment, they don't know what their function is, and they feel alone and lost sometimes, no? I think that making like a strong articulation between the organization inside the country is quite important for making every kind of project that the international organization like UN wants to do, no? I think that we have to evaluate first the weakness of each country where are you going to apply something, no? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you raise a valid point in terms of environmental advocacy and also awareness. Are people aware of what really is happening? Do they know what, the institutions they can be asking? Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm Dil. I'm from Nepal, where this EBA project has been implemented. I'm also the local resident of that particular area. Therefore, I want to share some of my experience about the particular site. Actually, during the implementation of this EBA project, there are some positive results as well. For example, it has created some sort of awareness about the EBA ecosystem-based adaptation approach at the local level, community level. However, the major gap is that we talk or if we discuss about the adaptation, the local community, they have developed their own adaptation plan, which is really community-based adaptation, not EBA, but that is CBA, community-based adaptation. Therefore, even the local government and other local agencies, they are also developing their own adaptation plan. Therefore, the gap is that during the implementation of this project, actually there is very weak coordination between different agencies and local communities. If we implement some sort of certain project for certain period, then after phase out of the project or any program, then definitely the local community are responsible to manage their resources by themselves. Therefore, if we consider the local needs and local knowledge and capacity to give continuity about the achievement of the project, then it will create some sort of benefit for the local communities. Otherwise, discuss about the ecosystem-based adaptation, but local communities and local government and other local institutions, if they are not ready to mainstreaming this approach, then it will not work in the future. Therefore, the major gap is that what is the differences between ecosystem-based adaptation and community-based adaptation? Because in the context of my country, in Nepal, the local community, they have their own plan to tackle adaptation related issue. Therefore, we need to consider the local context. Without considering the local context, just the approach or concept related to ecosystem-based adaptation may not work in the future.
Thank you very much. Can I actually just pass the box over to Ali, please, because before we lose this question, I think the question from Shtima from Zambia and also from a counterpart from Nepal, Dil, perhaps you can address those questions as well, because you've been involved instrumentally in this work as well. Thank you.
Maybe we need to have more discussion after the session, but just very quickly, when we talk about conservation, it is to conserve and work on the ecosystems and biodiversity conservation. So the co-benefits may or may not be targeted towards local communities. There will be some help which we think as per the theory of conservation. But when you talk about ecosystem-based adaptation and you do vulnerability assessment and then see what are the ecosystem services which are going down in the context of climate change and variability and other, and how those local ecosystems and biodiversity would help to reduce the climate risk. So that's the fine difference. So in the first one, it may or may not help local communities when you are doing conservation traditional, but in the other way, definitely ecosystem services and biodiversity will work towards local human climate resilience. And more details later, maybe after the session. About CBA and EBA, community-based adaptation may and may not look into local ecosystems and their services. It is like, having water availability to the local communities. And EBA, what we look into, communities are integral part of it. Any EBA project cannot be an adaptation project because it's human-centric. So you need to involve communities. So all the constituents of CBA are part of EBA. So there's, as such, CBA is part of EBA, is the terminology, and I think we are all to blame. We are working through different terminologies, different things keep coming up, and then communities' problems and solutions are not decided or determined or resolved through this academic discourses. So that's why maybe we need to just work with the local communities' problems and then see where ecosystem-based approaches can work best, where they need to be part of it. End of the day, hybrid solutions are the best solutions, where we link local solutions, community-based, and again, poverty reduction. Without that, we cannot achieve anything. We can discuss more later.
Thank you, Ali. I think really you raise a valid point and something I want to just, raise to the floor. Please, if you can actually tell us, what you're doing and also how you can contribute really to the Nairobi Work Program in terms of the support you can provide to governments so that they can be able to obviously integrate ecosystem-based adaptation into the Nairobi Work Program. Please, to the floor. And don't forget to introduce yourself. I think we should also start at the back and come forwards, perhaps. The people in the back?
Yeah.
Do you have a box in the back?
Yes, I do.
Great, thank you. Introduce yourself, please.
Okay, my name is Pumza from South Africa. I really appreciate the presentation. My question is directed to the colleague from Mexico who presented on the water reserves for environmental protection. As the Department of Water and Sanitation, we have a similar program, but we haven't incorporated climate change. So I'm interested to understand how do they factor climate scenarios in their environmental water allocations? Because that's what we're trying to factor in now going forward, because we've done environmental flows allocation for different systems in South Africa, but then now climate change scenarios have not been factored, and we want to factor in the scenarios. So if she can share, how do they do it, factoring climate change as well? Thanks.
Thank you, Pumza. Do you want to respond to that, Ninel, and then we'll get some more interventions, please?
Yes, climate change is related to water reserves in two ways. One way is that water reserves per se, as they are designed at the moment, can help to mitigate climate change impacts, especially regarding extreme events. But the other side is that climate change can impact e-flows directly. And what we are doing now is conducting a research, a vulnerability analysis, trying to find out how different climate change feasible scenarios can impact e-flows. So the idea is that the estimations of e-flows must be changed or must be adjusted, must be flexible as we see climate change impacts on the e-flows. So what we are doing now is trying to realize how big those impacts could be in the near future and trying to be flexible on defining e-flows along the program, in the rest of the program, and try to leave the door open for future modifications as we see the impacts.
Thank you. Please, any pledges, interventions, commitments to the floor?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentations. I'm Margarita Caso from Mexico, from the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change in Mexico. And I have a question for Mr. Ali Raza. We in Mexico, we included a section on our NDC. And on the other hand, we have been working with some EBA projects on some implementation of ecosystem adaptation measures. And these are two very different levels, the international commitments and on the other hand, the implementation of local measures. So one of our major challenges that we're facing now is related to the evaluation of these EBA measures, local EBA measures, and how they can contribute to our NDC. How do you effectively measure local activities in order that you can then report them as a contribution to the NDC? So maybe Mr. Ali, give us some. Yeah, well, your perspective on this.
One is again INDCs when they were started were reporting mechanisms, and then after Lima and other adaptation brought into that. So that was, very quickly done without thinking through how, these measures will be recorded and then reported. So INDC's end of the day is a reporting mechanism, So if you have, for that particular project, if we don't have baselines, most of the conservation organization, the baselines are just the project documents. So if we don't have a baseline, what household level vulnerabilities and income and other things were, and then after project interventions are over, we only look at project activity success. We don't have a yardstick to see. That's the problem, and that's common all over the world in most of the cases. There are exceptions which proves the rule, but the issue is that INDCs were done very quickly without having a baseline of the communities and others. So if in the revisions in 2018, we have some baseline, and again, it will be very challenging to have baselines where we can have, but at least maybe that's another thing for Nairobi work program, to have some guidelines, how to measure adaptation contributions which can be reported. And those guidelines can be used as common yardstick. Because whenever we do analysis all over the world, the issue is that we have apple and oranges. You can't do much comparison because we don't have standards. Now, with BMUB, others and other partners, we are trying to come up through FEBA to have, EBA criteria and standards. Those is just the pilot testing we will be doing. And if government is ready, institution, we are happy to work with you so that those can be mainstream later.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Please do. Because we don't have a perfect answer to anything.
Well,
That's why it's complex.
Most of the donor funding that Antigua has applied to, we have to show the involvement of the local communities. We have to have the social and environmental safeguards. We have to have the gender plans. And so you can't put the project together because the implementation is being done in these, it's not being done in a government office, it's in the local communities. So they input, actually the project should be developed on their needs. Problems, is it flooding, is it mosquitoes, whatever it is. So although we have just been accredited to the Adaptation Fund, and we had to go through a whole list of baseline data. We are seeking accreditation to the Green Climate Fund, the same thing. They want those baseline data. That's how you're going to evaluate the project. Thank you.
Thank you. And please don't forget to fill in the survey online. You all have access to that. Any other interventions? Maybe at the back, please introduce yourselves.
Hello, I'm Sylvia Vikander from the UN Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Centre based in Cambridge. And I just wanted to respond to sort of the pledges to the Nairobi Work Programme and how we can assist countries in their adaptation planning incorporating ecosystems. So at UNFCCC, we've been working a lot on building the evidence base that can support best practice implementation of EBA. In part, we're currently involved in the EBA effectiveness project with IUCN and IIED, working with partner countries to understand what criteria of success and failure are in EBA. And in particular at WCMC, we've been working on an inventory of tools and methods that can be used to support all of the different stages of EBA. So everything from planning through to design, implementation, M&E, and mainstreaming. In this current inventory, we've identified 222 tools, and I'm sure there are many more out there. But the idea is that we can turn this toolbox or this current inventory into something that's navigable and useful to practitioners and planners in EBA, to assist them in all of the various stages across different ecosystem types and with different focus target groups. So essentially we can, we're very interested in supporting countries in their NAP implementations, but also looking at subnational and local level planning and implementation. We've done a lot of work at developing vulnerability assessments, looking both at the social aspects and the ecological aspects. We were partners on the Mountain EBA project for that and developed the vulnerability and impact assessment guidance. We also worked in the Gambia and in Senegal on building community level resilience to climate change using CBA and EBA approaches. And we developed some guidance tools on that as well. So basically, we're hoping to increase our work with countries who need, that guidance on best practice in all of the stages through EBA, and we can help in both, well, hopefully not developing any more tools as we have so many, but in guiding, various processes. And at the center at WCMC, lots of colleagues with expertise in monitoring and evaluation, indicator development, and mainstreaming. So if you think you need help on any of these kinds of issues, do get in touch. I'll be around after the session.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone in the back? Sakile from the Convention on Biological Diversity, please.
Hi, so thank you. My name is Sakile, and as Musonda said, I work for the Convention on Biological Diversity. We're a proud partner of the Nairobi Work Program, and we are proud to work with the LEG. I just wanted to talk about a work that we produced last year, which was a synthesis report on experiences with ecosystem-based approaches to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. This was done in collaboration with a lot of partners, a lot of whom are in the room right now: UN Environment, UNFCCC, BirdLife International, I think WCMC, I don't remember very well, WWF, and a lot of others. And so basically what we did was we looked at how was EBA implemented, what were the successes, and we looked at a lot of things. We looked at, okay, what is it? What does it look like on the ground? And we looked at programs and projects that might not have been labeled as EBA, but actually did what we expect an EBA project to do. We looked at projects that were labeled as EBA, but actually were not EBA. Oh, IUCN, sorry, Ali, I didn't see you there. Ali was a good partner as well. And so we also looked at, how has it been integrated into climate change policies and programs, or biodiversity, or national development plans and programs. We looked at how does it integrate the needs of indigenous peoples and local communities? How have they participated in the development of the programs? We've looked at issues like trade-offs and thresholds to adaptation, gender mainstreaming. So we've produced the synthesis report, and there's like 3 or 4 copies on the table outside. And of course, you can always find it on our website. I think it was also quoted a bit in the Nairobi Work Program synthesis report. And of course, we will continue to collaborate with the Nairobi Work Program. We will contribute such technical work as well as other types of work. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we have a commitment from the CBD, WCMC. Any other off the floor, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Annalise Vergara. I work for WWF at the Amazon Coordination Unit. And I have a question for Ninel. Thinking about the context of the Amazon, you mentioned that the program was based in basins. And I was wondering what the connection is, if there is any, of the water reserves with specific protection designations for rivers, and also the free flow of rivers. If those two possibilities or issues were at all considered in the proposal.
Okay. No.
Thank you. Water reserves are the part of the ideas behind it is like trying to provide waters for protected areas, as well as trying to maintain rivers in a minimum healthy situation. So the free-flowing rivers is based is related to that idea, but it is not necessarily, you can have a water resource but not necessarily a free flowing river. But actually this program started with the last free flowing river in Mexico, which is the San Pedro Mezquital River Basin. And the idea is that water reserves can be integrated into the territory in the land planning management. It can be a management plan for a protected area, or it can be a management plan at the river basin scale. So it is related, but they can be complementary measures, but they are not substitutes. I don't think so.
Thank you. Any other commitments from the floor, please? Oh, there you go.
Thank you. I'm Daniel from GIZ, the German International Corporation. My colleagues working with EBA have forwarded some messages I would like to share with you. GIZ has implemented about 31 EBA-linked projects in the last 10 years and in various regions and ecosystems, including 6 explicit EBA projects funded under the International Climate Change Initiative. And we are delighted to contribute to share various project experiences to the synthesis paper that has been mentioned, that clearly showcases the importance of integrating ecosystem-based adaptation into adaptation strategies, including challenges, but also very practical best practices. National EBA project called Mainstreaming EBA, and it aims to strengthen the ability of decision makers at international and national, local levels to mainstream EBA adaptation into policy and planning processes. And this is achieved by involving a mix of policy advice, capacity development, and the establishment of knowledge networks based on practical tools and examples. The project has also set up an open EBA community of practice that also includes a webinar series that can be accessed under www.adaptationcommunity.net. And it also has collected more than 30 applied EBA cases or solutions under the GIZ and IUCN supported Panorama platform, panorama.solutions, funded by Jeff and Iki. These solutions provide additional insights in EBA working on the ground to inspire decision makers and practitioners. So we invite members of this meeting to be part of this to further strengthen EBA in planning and decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. So we've got a couple of minutes left. Any last thoughts, interventions, please? Commitments in that extreme corner over there, the very back.
Can you pass?
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Donna from the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent Societies, and I would like to share an innovative approach where we applied EBA in the humanitarian world. For the past 6 years, we have been implementing an alliance-based program called Partners for Resilience. And in that program, we integrated climate change adaptation, ecosystems-based management, and also risk DRR. So it actually focuses on vulnerable communities and looking at how local governments, national governments, and even regional bodies can actually have this integrated mindset and remove the silos in using and developing programs, resilience building programs on the ground. This is an alliance of 5 Netherlands-based organizations where Netherlands Red Cross, Climate Center, Cord Aid, Wetlands International, and CARE Netherlands came together, and it's fully funded by the Dutch government, and it's being rolled out in 10 countries globally. Happy to share more information on how we are applying integrated risk management, including EBA with DRR and climate change adaptation.
Thank you so much. I think we're coming to an end here. If you be very quick, because it's time.
Yes, I
Almost.
promise I will be brief. So my name is Juan Carlos Sanchez. I work also with the IUCN, specifically with the Environmental Law Center. And I just wanted to touch upon a small topic that perhaps haven't heard so much about it, even though I came a little bit late. Apologies for that, which is the law and policy interface related to ecosystem-based adaptation. So basically just to say that me, together with other organizations, or myself working with other organizations, including Graham Institute, that's a UNFCCC Secretariat, UN, we're working also on understanding what are the legal and policy frameworks that support and enable ecosystem-based adaptation upscaling. So just to pledge that the work that we're doing on that behalf will also be part of this database, especially through my IUCN colleagues. We can make that available to start making that linkage between the EBA work on the ground, which is fantastic, but also with the enabling policy frameworks and legal frameworks that are also, as we all know, very important part of the equation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Absolutely critical. The role of governance, laws, and regulations that tend to be very binding and also very important. On that note, I really would like to thank all the presenters. I want to thank the Secretariat for the organization of this. And please do not forget to fill in the survey. If you can, pass it on to your colleagues and your counterparts. Ambassador, thank you. Mr. Mafabi and Ninel, and also Ali, Angela, and also Mr. Desanka, thank you so much. And to all of you who stayed for this entire period, thank you so much. So we can give ourselves a round of applause.
You're from the GIZ.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any projects of GIZ, of ecosystem-based adaptation, especially in semi-urban areas in Southeast Asia?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
that's a very specific question, but okay.
Semi-urban areas, yeah. I must confess, due to the limited spaces here, my